All right, so strap yourselves in, folks. Today we're plunging headfirst into one of America's most infamous cold cases,
Oh, yeah, a real head scratcher.
the Zodiac Killer. Late 1960s, think Northern California, and picture a string of brutal murders that just completely gripped the San Francisco Bay Area.
The stuff of nightmares, truly.
Yeah. And to make it even weirder, the killer had this thing for riddles.
Oh, yeah.
Cryptic messages, ciphers, sending them off to newspapers, like he was taunting everyone, trying to, catch him.
Playing games with the authorities. It's chilling, isn't it? The audacity.
It's like he wanted the attention, wanted to be in the spotlight. So we've got a ton of your research here. Police reports, old newspapers, even some of those creepy letters from the Zodiac himself.
Oh, fantastic. This is going to be a fascinating deep dive.
We're talking deep dive into the victims, those confirmed, the locations, the killer's correspondence, and of course,
All those theories.
all those theories about who might be behind it all. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's start with what we know for sure. 5 confirmed murders, 2 survivors, each case, leaving investigators completely stumped.
Scrambling for answers.
Yeah, exactly. The first victims, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, a teenage couple, were found shot to death on Lake Herman Road in December 1968. The attack seemed so random, no robbery, no clear motive, just cold-blooded murder.
That randomness, that's what makes it so terrifying, right? It's like he was playing a game, just picking victims at random.
Absolutely. That lack of a clear motive, that was incredibly frustrating for law enforcement. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It wasn't until the next attack, 6 months later, that we started to see a possible pattern.
Right. July 69, the attack on Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau at Blue Rock Springs Park. This one was different, brazen, almost like a direct challenge to the police.
Oh, absolutely. Much more in your face.
And it's crucial for a couple of reasons. First, we have Michael Mageau, the only surviving witness. He could actually describe the attacker.
I mean, terrifying as that must have been.
Of course, but his account, it provided some much-needed clues about the Zodiac's appearance.
Right. And then minutes after the shooting, you have that chilling phone call to police.
Oh, right.
The caller, completely calm and collected, confesses to the murders, even links the attack to the Faraday-Jensen case from the year before. It was at that point that authorities realized they were dealing with something far more sinister. A serial killer and one who craved attention.
Someone playing a very deadly game. And that game was about to get even more complex. Just a few months later, September 69, we have the attack on Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa. And here's where things take a really strange turn.
Okay, yeah, this is the one where the Zodiac shows up in that bizarre hooded costume, right? Like, where'd that even come from? Feels almost, ritualistic.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a random shooting in the dark anymore. The escalation of violence, that chilling costume with the Zodiac symbol on it, the message carefully written on Hartnell's car door, it all pointed to a killer who was becoming bolder, more confident.
And more obsessed with creating this, terrifying persona.
A brand, almost.
It's like he was building a brand, a myth around himself.
Exactly. Like the same way a comic book villain would.
Yeah. But this wasn't fiction.
Right. Real lives were shattered by this guy's, twisted desires.
And it's easy to get caught up in all the, the mystery and the intrigue. But it's important to remember the victims, the human cost of these crimes.
Absolutely.
Brian Hartnell, he survived that attack.
Miraculously.
But Cecilia Shepard, tragically, she died from her injuries. Hartnell's account of the event, though, that gave investigators valuable insight into the Zodiac's behavior, his speech patterns, mannerisms.
Yeah, those little things, they can be crucial in building a psychological profile.
And it's incredible that after such a traumatic experience, he was able to provide those details.
I know, right? Must have been so difficult to relive those moments. But his testimony, it was crucial.
One thing that stands out, though, from Hartnell's account is that, there's this contradiction in the Zodiac's personality. Meticulous planning, you've got the chilling costume. But then at the same time, he's almost conversational with the victims before,
Casual, even.
Yeah.
Just chatting before the violence explodes.
Yeah. It's like this, chilling duality, almost a Jekyll and Hyde persona, makes him even more unpredictable and terrifying.
Right.
And then, just when they think they're starting to understand his pattern, he completely switches it up.
Right.
The next confirmed murder, Paul Stein, a cab driver in San Francisco, October 69, this one seems to completely break the mold. No secluded location, no couples, just a seemingly random attack right in the heart of the city.
Right. Some experts think this signifies a change in his MO.
Modus operandi, yeah.
A calculated move to keep everyone guessing, expand his reign of terror.
But what really confirms this as a Zodiac crime, he sends a piece of Steen's bloody shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle.
Talk about a calling card.
Right. Chilling.
That was a statement. He was in control of the narrative, a brutal confirmation he was still out there and capable of striking anywhere at any time. 5
confirmed murders, 2 survivors, and a city completely gripped by fear.
But the story, as we know, doesn't end there.
No, not at all. The Zodiac's, fascination with communication, with taunting the authorities, the public, all of that, it was far from over. The murders may have stopped, or at least the confirmed ones, but the letters, the ciphers, those kept coming. It's like he wanted to keep the game going, keep everyone on edge, even from the shadows.
He needed that attention.
So let's talk about those letters, those cryptic messages that have baffled experts for, decades. Why this obsession with newspapers and the San Francisco Chronicle in particular.
Well, you have to remember, this was the late 1960s, significant social and political upheaval. And the media, they played a huge role in shaping public perception. The Zodiac, by choosing to communicate through newspapers, he wasn't just seeking notoriety, he was trying to insert himself into the national conversation.
He wanted to be a symbol, of chaos and fear.
Yeah, exactly.
In a world that was already feeling pretty chaotic. It's like he understood the power of the media, how to manipulate it to his advantage. He was creating his own legend.
Oh, absolutely. A boogeyman that haunted the collective consciousness.
And honestly, he succeeded, didn't he? I mean, here we are, all these years later, still talking about him, analyzing every word, trying to decipher his motives.
Yeah, he tapped into something primal. Our fascination with the dark side of human nature, the desire to understand the inexplicable, and the fact that he's still unidentified, a cipher himself, that just adds to the mystique.
Right, it's the ultimate unsolved mystery. So let's get into some of these letters, those ciphers. We know the 408 character cipher was cracked back in 1969 by a school teacher and his wife. Right?
Yep, cracked it wide open.
Yeah.
And it offered this glimpse, a disturbing one, into the Zodiac's psyche. Talked about his desire to kill, warped sense of pleasure he derived from taking a human life. Even mentioned a belief in an afterlife where his victims would become his slaves.
That's just, chilling. It's a window into the darkness that consumed him, a confirmation we're dealing with someone truly disturbed. And then there's the 340-character cipher, the one that took decades to solve. What did that reveal?
Well, that one finally cracked in 2020. It was more of a taunt, a denial of responsibility for a phone call to a TV show, and more ramblings about his, afterlife fantasies. And interestingly, it had misspellings, grammatical errors, which fueled debate about, his actual intelligence. Was he a mastermind playing mind games, or just a disturbed individual craving attention?
Right, seeking validation.
Yeah.
It's wild to think that it took over 50 years to decode that cipher. But even with those breakthroughs, there are still unsolved ciphers out there, right? It's like they hold the key, a glimpse into the true identity of the Zodiac, just waiting to be unlocked.
It's tantalizing, isn't it? The possibilities.
It is. And that's why this case is still so captivating, I think. All those unanswered questions, those unsolved mysteries, it keeps us coming back, looking for clues, hoping to finally unmask the man behind the mask.
It's the ultimate puzzle.
So if those ciphers hold the key, then the next step is to figure out who wrote them, right?
Right. Let's dive into the prime suspect, the name practically synonymous with the Zodiac Killer, Arthur Lee Allen.
Okay, here's where things get really interesting. What's the story with this guy? Why was he considered the prime suspect for so long?
Well, Allen was a convicted child molester and had been on law enforcement's radar for years. He lived in Vallejo, where several of the Zodiac attacks happened, and he was fired from his teaching job for inappropriate behavior with students.
So yeah, some serious red flags right off the bat. What about hard evidence, though? What actually linked him to the Zodiac crimes?
There was a lot of circumstantial evidence. He owned a Zodiac brand watch, and that was mentioned in one of the letters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then a former friend claimed that Allen had talked about wanting to kill people and, call himself Zodiac.
Oh, that's creepy.
And maybe most compelling, Michael Mago, the survivor of the Blue Rock Springs attack, he identified Allen from a photo lineup.
Wait, hold on. So the one person who actually came face-to-face with the Zodiac pointed the finger at Allen. That's got to be a slam dunk.
Yeah, it was a huge development, no doubt. But eyewitness testimony, it can be unreliable, especially in those high-stress situations. And this was years after the attack. Memories can change.
Right.
Despite that identification and all that circumstantial evidence, investigators could never definitively link Allen to the crimes.
What do you mean? Like, what was missing?
Fingerprints. Allen's prints didn't match any found at the crime scenes. And then later, when DNA testing became available, they compared samples from the Zodiac's letters with Allen's DNA.
And
No match. He remained a person of interest right up until he died in '92, but he was never officially charged.
so if the fingerprints and the DNA didn't match, why were they so convinced it was him for so long?
See, that's the frustrating thing with this case. There are always these nagging questions, these loose ends. That lack of concrete physical evidence, it doesn't necessarily mean a suspect's innocent. It's possible he was just really careful, wore gloves, didn't leave any traces. There were also inconsistencies in some witness statements, conflicting timelines, and rumors of evidence being mishandled, even lost.
It sounds like this investigation was just, like, plagued by a whole bunch of missed opportunities and dead ends.
Yeah, you could say that. And for some people, all the ambiguity, it just adds to the mystery. Arthur Lee Allen might not have been the Zodiac, but he'll always be tied to the case, this shadowy figure that sort of embodies how elusive the killer himself was.
Right. It's almost more unsettling than not having any suspects at all. Knowing that someone like Allen was out there living his life while investigators were, desperately trying to connect the dots, it adds a whole other layer of creepiness.
You're right. And it highlights a huge part of the Zodiac case, the psychological impact. Not just on the victims and families, but on the entire Bay Area. People were living in fear, constantly looking over their shoulder, wondering if they could be next.
Living that nightmare. And that's what the Zodiac wanted, right? That fear, the feeling of power and control. It wasn't just about taking lives. It was about messing with people's minds, turning their everyday life into a horror movie.
Exactly. The letters, those ciphers, that was all part of his strategy. It wasn't just confession. It was him actively engaging, keeping everyone on edge.
So if Allen wasn't the Zodiac, who are some of the other potential suspects? Did any of them actually pan out?
Oh, there's been tons of theories and potential suspects over the years, each with varying degrees of, plausibility. Some were looked into and then dismissed, just not enough evidence. Others are still just speculation, fueled by all the online sleuths and, dedicated zodiologists who spend their time combing through case files looking for some connection that everyone else has missed.
It's kind of amazing how this case still has such a hold on people after all these years.
It speaks to our need to solve mysteries, doesn't it? Unsolved puzzles.
Yeah.
That desire to bring a killer to justice. The possibility of uncovering a secret that's been hidden for, decades. Like a real-life detective story everyone wants to solve.
Totally. Okay, so who are some of the other names that have come up? The more intriguing ones, I mean.
Well, one name that comes up a lot is Earl Van Best Jr. Interesting guy. He actually looked a lot like that composite sketch of the Zodiac.
Oh, wow. Really?
But solid evidence connecting him to the crimes. Still missing. Another suspect is Lawrence Kane, a guy who worked at the same hotel as one of the victims. He had a history of violence against women, and we know he was around the areas of several Zodiac attacks.
So both had possible motives and fit parts of the profile. But, again, no smoking gun.
Right, no smoking gun. That's the frustrating pattern we see over and over. Another interesting, though controversial, suspect is Rick Marshall. He was a ham radio operator living in the Bay Area during the whole Zodiac period. Some believe he embedded coded messages in his broadcasts.
Wait, hold up. Coded messages in? Like radio broadcasts?
Yeah.
That's like something straight out of a spy movie.
I know, right?
Wow.
And while there's no concrete evidence to support that theory, it definitely makes the case even more intriguing. The fact that we're still finding new information, potential leads after all this time, it shows how complex this whole thing is.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion. Every time you think you're getting close to the center, there's another layer underneath.
Exactly. And that's why it's so fascinating, so frustrating, and just so compelling. A puzzle with pieces scattered all over the place. A mystery that just won't be solved.
Okay, so we've got Arthur Lee Allen, our prime suspect, who was never charged. Then you've got Earl Van Best Jr., Lawrence Kane, and Rick Marshall, all with their own, connections. What about the whole multiple killer theory? Is there anything that points to that?
Yeah, the idea of multiple Zodiacs, it's pretty popular with some researchers and those amateur sleuths we talked about. They point to those inconsistencies we mentioned, witness descriptions, differences in the handwriting of the letters, and just how geographically spread out those attacks were. They say it could point to a group, not just one guy.
A group of Zodiacs. Wow, now that's just taking creepy to a whole new level. But wouldn't that be even harder to pull off logistically? Like keeping a secret like that between multiple people, that would seem nearly impossible.
It would be a challenge for sure. but not completely out of the question. Think about cults or extremist groups where everyone is bound by a shared ideology or belief system. It's possible the Zodiac crimes were the result of a similar thing, a group working together carrying out these horrific acts.
That's a scary thought. And I guess it would explain some of the contradictions.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe one person wrote the letters, another carried out the attacks. Maybe they had specific roles, different levels of involvement. It's all just theory, of course, but the possibility is there.
It's definitely intriguing. So we've got all these theories, a bunch of suspects, but no clear answers. What do you think, realistically, what are the chances we ever actually figure out who the Zodiac was?
Oh man, that's the million-dollar question. On one hand, we've got all these advancements in DNA technology, forensic science. It gives us hope. We've seen cold cases cracked after decades because of new techniques and a fresh look at the evidence.
So there's still hope.
Definitely. But then again, you have to consider the challenges. The Zodiac was so meticulous, he barely left any traceable evidence. Witnesses are getting older, memories fade, and who knows, crucial evidence might be lost, damaged, beyond repair.
It's a race against time, then.
You could say that. But this case, it's proof that even the most complex and confusing mysteries can still reveal their secrets, with enough time, persistence, and maybe a little bit of luck.
I like the sound of that. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the victims. I know we've mentioned their names, but I think it's important to remember these weren't just names in a report. These were real people with lives, hopes, dreams, and it was all cut short.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the puzzle, the ciphers, the suspects, that we forget about the human cost of it all.
Let's start with David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the young couple killed on Lake Herman Road. They were just teenagers on their first date. Can you tell us a bit about their lives, who they were, outside of this horrible event?
Well, David Faraday was a popular student, an athlete. People said he had this easygoing personality, infectious smile. And Betty Lou Jensen, she was described as bright, bubbly, loved music and fashion. They were both looking forward to the holidays, excited about their futures, just starting to experience life.
It's just heartbreaking to think about what happened to them, the fear they must have felt, and their families. I can't imagine losing a child so young in such a terrible way.
It really shook the community. A small town where everyone knows each other, suddenly feeling vulnerable. That sense of safety, of innocence, it was shattered.
Then just a few months later, you have Darlene Ferrin, a young mother, and Michael Mageau, her boyfriend, attacked at Blue Rock Springs Park. Tell us about them.
Darlene Ferrin was a devoted mom of 3, working hard to support her family. She was known for her kindness and her laugh. And Michael Mageau, even though he wasn't as badly injured as Darlene, he carried the scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of his life.
It's amazing he survived. But coming face to face with the Zodiac like that, I can't imagine the trauma. Living with the fear that he might come back, the guilt of surviving when Darlene didn't.
It must have been incredibly difficult, but his testimony was crucial, even though it obviously haunted him.
Then we have Cecilia Shepard, who was killed at Lake Berryessa, and Brian Hartnell, who thankfully survived.
Cecilia Shepard was a college student, bright future ahead of her, known for her intelligence, her sense of humor, and her love for animals. Her murder just devastated her family and friends. They couldn't understand why it happened.
And Brian Hartnell, not only did he survive, but he was also brave enough to face his attacker in court during the trial of Arthur Lee Allen. It takes incredible strength to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was really important in keeping the case in the public eye, making sure people didn't forget that the Zodiac was still out there.
And lastly, Paul Stein, the cab driver in San Francisco, the last confirmed victim.
Yeah, Paul Stein was a hardworking man just trying to provide for his family. He was known for being friendly, always willing to help people. His murder really shocked the city. It proved that no one was truly safe.
It's a powerful reminder that even in a case as complex and, captivating as this one, real people lost their lives. We can't forget them, their stories, and how deeply these crimes affected their families and their communities.
You're right. Behind all the mystery and speculation, there's a very real human tragedy. A tragedy that we're still feeling the impact of today as we search for answers and justice. And maybe some sense of closure, even if it never comes.
All right, so we've covered the victims, the suspects, the evidence, or the lack of it. But there's another piece to this I think we need to talk about, the cultural impact.
You mean like the Zodiac's legacy?
Exactly. This case, it's inspired so many books, movies, documentaries, TV shows even. People are still fascinated by it all these years later. Why do you think that is?
It's that unsolved element, isn't it? It grabs you. A masked killer, cryptic messages, it's like a real-life thriller. But it goes deeper than that, I think. The Zodiac, he played on something very basic, our fear of the unknown, this idea that evil could be anywhere, hiding in plain sight.
And he was so good at it. The costume, the letters, the ciphers, all so calculated, so dramatic. He was like a performer, putting on a show for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. And that showmanship, it just added to his mystique. He knew how to manipulate, how to keep people guessing, even now, all these years later.
And there's the whole code thing, that puzzle that needs to be solved, like a challenge, something people can't resist trying to figure out.
Right, and that's what keeps the case alive. The possibility that somewhere, hidden in all the details, is the key to unlocking the whole thing.
It's like a real-life treasure hunt, except the treasure is the truth, the Zodiac's identity.
Exactly. And that's why people are still digging, still searching, still hoping to find that missing piece.
It feels like we're so close with this case, like we're right on the verge of a breakthrough, and then nothing. Do you think, with all the evidence and the different theories we've talked about, that maybe someone listening right now, someone outside law enforcement, could be the one to crack it, like a, modern-day Sherlock Holmes, just waiting to connect the dots?
Honestly, it's possible. The internet has changed everything about how we look at these cold cases. You've got online communities totally focused on solving mysteries, amateur detectives with tons of information at their fingertips, and new forensic techniques popping up all the time. It wouldn't shock me if some, everyday person just armed with a computer and a lot of curiosity stumbled on the answer, the thing that's been missed this whole time.
I love that idea. It's like a giant crowdsourced investigation. Maybe the answer's been right there all along, hidden in some tiny detail or overlooked clue. It'd be amazing to see the power of collective intelligence finally solve a case that stumped the experts for so long.
It would be pretty incredible, and it would prove how much this case still captures our imaginations. The Zodiac, even though he was so brutal, he somehow captured the public's attention in a way that most criminals never do. He's become this, symbol, this enigma, a challenge that everyone wants to take on.
It's like he created his own legend, this biggie man who still haunts us. And I kind of think that's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, you're probably right. He wasn't just a killer, remember. He was manipulative, a showman who knew how to use fear and mystery to his advantage. He wanted to be remembered, to be feared, to become this icon of darkness. And in a twisted way, he did it.
He's almost achieved this weird immortality through the case. As long as people are talking about him, trying to figure him out, the legend of the Zodiac lives on.
That's it, exactly. And that lasting fascination, it says a lot about us, doesn't it? Our need to make sense of the unknown and how even when faced with evil, we still want knowledge, we want justice, we want to understand. That need, it never really goes away.
So where does that leave us? We've gone through the evidence, the theories, we've tried to get inside the head of a killer who's still as elusive as ever. What do we take away from all of this? What's the bottom line?
Well, it reminds us that even with all our technology, all our forensic tools, some mysteries just stay mysteries. The Zodiac case is a perfect example. It shows us there are limits to what we can know, that sometimes the truth is just out of reach.
It's kind of humbling, We like to think we can figure anything out, but then a case like this comes along, and it reminds us that some things about the universe, about the human mind, they just don't have easy explanations.
That's true. And yet we keep looking, keep pushing for answers because we have this deep need to understand the world around us. And maybe that's the biggest message the Zodiac case sends. The human spirit, in its search for truth and justice, it never gives up, no matter how impossible things might seem.
It's a bit of a heavy note to end on, but I think it's an important one. So to everyone listening, keep your minds sharp, your eyes open, and your detective hats on. Maybe, just maybe, one of you will be the one to crack the code and finally bring this story to a close.
Hey, you never know. The Zodiac case has taught us that sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places.
Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the Zodiac Killer case. It's been a wild ride, filled with twists and turns and questions we might never have the answers to. We hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something new along the way. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep those theories coming. You never know. You might be the one to finally solve it.